of all, I would like to thank you all again for joining the follow-up session. Unfortunately, as you can see, all of the panelists just left. So obviously, it will be a quiet challenge to have a fruitful follow-up on the session. But then on the other hand, we have quite experienced people. Martin, who has just joined the session. He's actually a keen expert in Internet of Things. He has much what he had to add as a value. And we have other people from other sessions who will contribute to the session. So basically, we are a very small group, so feel free, let's make it as a roundtable discussion. It won't be 90 minutes, obviously. We have no more than 40 to 60 minutes, so we can just discuss it openly and feel free to jump into the conversation whenever you need. As a conclusion, it was a very good discussion with the previous panelists. We've managed to discuss all of the topics on data protection in the cloud, on the right to be forgotten. It's a quite sensitive topic. It seems that a lot of discussion will be made in the future. So basically, with that, I would like to give the word to Martin, where we haven't been able to discuss the IoT and all the related issues.
Well, thank you. I wasn't here this morning because actually I had a session on Internet of Things, hence not a lack of interest, but really a conflict of agenda. As I haven't been here, excuse me if I double some of the issues. That's not my intent. This is a small group. I'm very willing to take your nods and suggestions at any point in time. If you want to sit even closer and we can make a circle, I'm very happy with that as well. With all the privacy issues that exist already on the internet, something new is happening. And this is that the internet is changing while we're still trying to repair what's not perfect in its current setup. And we're not going to stop that. One way of the way it's changing is that all these things on the internet are getting connected, and you're getting connected to it, for instance, using your smartphone. But also services will be rolled out based on all the data that are connected. An example is, for instance, the road systems where you see, hey, it gives predictions of at what time you will arrive there, rather than just there's a traffic jam, things like that. And increasingly, the internet also reaches out in our house without us having anything to do with it, because it's not just us using our PC or our smartphone, but it's also things like the energy meter or the TV in our homes that interacts via the internet and sometimes even stores data on central databases to provide a better service. And mostly, obviously, that is exactly the reason why these things are happening. We're moving towards a service economy. And being connected and being able to draw upon central knowledge and central data helps to provide better services. At the same time, this means that data are collected. And this is where the issue comes, how do we want to deal with it? If we don't do anything, all the data about everybody at any point in time will be there. And because of all these masses of data, they will also be relatable to you. So there is a scenario of a future world in which, using the databases, in principle, we should be able to make a film of your life, including which movies you watched, which temperatures you had in your house, which guests, what you ate, what you drank, etc. That may not be what we want. And maybe it doesn't matter. I'm not really about the judgment. I think what we don't realize yet is how much is stored on us. So we are not aware. People are not aware. Some of us are. Probably the people in this room are already more aware than the rest of the world. And I can tell you it's even further than you think currently. An example is these TVs that now operate on motion or on voice. They learn all the time. They learn from what you say to your TV, and they react better. That is because these data on what you say or what you move are stored, collected centrally, interpreted, and the interpretation is increasing in quality all the time. So this, without having anything said about it, is related to even the location of your TV, which is your home. Ultimately, you could see that would be quite intrusive, and we don't even think about it. Now, you may think, well, I can turn my TV off, but you can also turn your TV on by the command TV on, which means it's listening, even when it's off. So this is an example of the things that people aren't often aware of, and this is the early days. This intrusion of things, observing, monitoring, and taking action will only go further. And we want it, so that's the other side. We also want it, not per se that TV doing everything, although people choose for it because they like it. We want gadgets, we like gadgets, but we also need it, for instance, for people who are getting older, and our societies are getting grayer. Do we want all these people that when they get old to put them in homes? Can we still afford that? Do we want that? Or can we assist them by improving their home with little electronic gadgets like after 5 minutes the fridge being open, like, hey, do I still need to be open? Bing, you know, either to the person involved or to the support environment. Things like that. We needed to observe our environment, to, for instance, pollution, to register pollution takes place, being able to take action. Whether that means sending somebody or set on the, for instance, in the room, the air conditioning is just an example of how our environment can be managed without us having anything to do about it. Great. So, with the discussion you had this morning on privacy, the right to be forgotten, which if I just see that, it looks like the conclusion was it's not the right to be forgotten, but the right to be de-indexed. At the internet, you still have this option like, do you want this? Yes, no. Sometimes that doesn't even mean, do you want this? If you agree with the conditions, you can use the service or not at all. And sometimes there's even in between. You can use the service, but we will not preempt what your next question is, so it will take you more time to use it. In the Internet of Things environment, an environment where everything is connected, you can imagine that a camera doesn't ask whether I want to be on it. Well, here I have a direct interaction with the person behind it, but not for CCTV, and this is just one of the sensors in our environment. So, hey, opting out becomes hardly an option. So, how do we deal with that? And I think this is one of the most important issues at the moment, if you think about also progressing the Internet of Things. The opportunities that come with it are great, but how do we do it in a responsible way? I'm very curious to your thoughts about that. Currently, most of us are European in this room, I think, not all of us. You are aware of the data protection regulation, privacy and data protection regulation. I'm sure you touched upon it this morning. The Article 29 Working Party concluded in its first opinion on the Internet of Things, well, if there's data that can relate to persons, they're subject of this legislation. So you cannot share that without explicit permission, etc., etc. Well, that becomes a non-starter almost for a lot of services. So how do we find a way that we still, in its core value, what we are trying to protect with the legislation is to have a certain amount of space to maneuver, to be private, to make choice, and at the same time benefit from all the goodies that are on offer. And how do we make sure that our industry can be part of this global development and serve the world without being hampered in that as well? So how do we find the right balance in a new technology environment in which everything is connected? So that seems like a good opening for the discussion.
Louise Bennett, BCS, the Chartered Institute for IT. I've done quite a lot of work on some of the areas you're talking about, and one of the things I've been looking at recently is the ethics of care robots. As I'm getting older, Amelia and I were saying we met a couple of years ago, and she was younger then, and I was younger then, but I was never as young as her. With care robots, I think it's a very complex ethical issue about who has control and who shares things. One of the things that's quite interesting in the UK, the Alzheimer's Society has looked at whether it is ethical and right, and they will recommend that people who have Alzheimer's can have GPS location on them, so that if they do wander from home, people know where they are and can help them to come back and take them back home again. And I think that's a responsible use of that. People were very worried that if that happened, then criminals could hack into it and they would know that the old person wasn't at home and they could go and steal things or whatever. So you clearly need safeguards. I also think looking at some other care robots which do things like reminding people to take their medication if they're living on their own at home. You have this problem if I personally don't want to take that medication because I know it will, I will feel ill if I have a drink and I want to have a drink and whatever. Should my doctor be able to interfere and say I should do it? Should my children, who might be looking at it, overrule my decision and say you've got to have that medication? I think there are a lot of issues that we really do need to talk about as a society, about what is right and what is wrong, what is ethical, and it's going to come down to what is right for individual people in individual situations. But it's a discussion we should have, because these care robots will be enormously helpful, but they can, they can be abused.
Hi, Jacob Dexe from Swedish ICT. I have a point that kind of relates to your sort of worst case scenario, not really, but the responsibility for actors to have good respect for privacy. In most towns, you will probably notice there is free Wi-Fi in the city center, or in many towns. One of the things that go behind this technology is that companies can put up Wi-Fi routers where they register the MAC addresses that try to connect to the router. I've spoken to a company called Bambi Labs in Sweden. They give this service, free Wi-Fi, to the municipality. But they also collect all the MAC addresses and sell information to the municipality, where they give heat maps of how people move in the urban center, so that the municipalities can get better information about how people move, how they should put rent on different buildings, where they should build roadblocks, where they should build bicycle stands and everything. The problem is that Bambi Labs doesn't take responsibility for the data. They use a one-way hash for all the MAC addresses, which is not anonymous. You can easily identify people within the network, which means that everyone who lives in the urban center can be identified by this company. And the municipality doesn't ask questions regarding its citizens' privacy. They don't require the company to take proper methods and proper actions to actually secure the data. And I think one of the relations to the IoT and the development there is that you have the possibility of companies taking a larger responsibility when it comes to, especially the public sector, buying technological services and applications. They do not ask the right questions so that we can have proper accountability when it comes to the technology around us. And that's a problem. You should look into if that happens in your municipality, because it's very interesting. And I think Amelia has more points on that when she speaks.
Hello everybody, I'm Florian. I'm the InSafe Youth Ambassador, or one of them. Hello. I wanted to add something with what you said, that they're using a one-time hash, so it's now a little bit a technical approach, because for example there is the technology called a one-time password, so it's really an high encryption, and you can only de-encrypt it with a one-time password and they use it one time and then it's not able to use it. So what's my point is, we need a quite simple technology, an encryption technology that is able to close a whole network, and that, for example, the company who is producing the chip that is running in your fridge and the caretaking robot, that the company is, as soon as the robot starts its work at the family, the company is not able to access the generated data because it's encrypted, like so strong that you cannot get to it. Is this a little bit understanding what I mean? No, it's not. It's not preventing the idea of the Internet of Things, because there's still the communication. So they'll still be able to communicate from your clothing to your fridge and to your locket and whatever. But the company is not able to access your specific data and tell you, okay, you went out of the house at 6 o'clock, even though they produce it. So like a standard that is every company have to integrate them in their systems, and as soon as your internet device is going online for your private interaction, the encryption starts and the company is not able to access the data. That's a technical approach.
Thank you for that. Interesting. What you basically said, also, it's like I want to be able, as a consumer, to control, to make a choice in how my environment communicates with the outside world. I want to determine whether I want to share or not. Right? Yeah, that makes sense.
Right. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Amelia Andersdotter. I don't know if I should be standing up or if I should be at least sitting somewhere where... And nobody is bothered by the fact that I actually have my back against most of you because you're zoning out or twittering, in either case.
I'm just one person, so...
Very good. So, I have been a member of the European Parliament in the past, and in that capacity was involved in the General Data Protection Regulation. I try to continue my work after the European Parliament by working at the Swedish municipal level and seeing how different municipalities in Sweden are implementing various forms of privacy measures. Earlier this week, as I was trying to distract myself from my upcoming exams, I looked at all of the municipal websites. Which municipalities in Sweden have trackers such as JavaScripts or tracking cookies that report to a private company, often overseas, that you have visited the municipality and which particular aspect of your municipality you were trying to inform yourself about. And it turns out only 2% of Swedish municipalities allow you to contact them online without reporting to an overseas company that you have done so, which shows that there is a clear lack of awareness in municipalities as what are the terms of interaction between you and them. Now, tying back into the discussion about the Internet of Things, which this appears to have been the major impetus of this panel, Where I think we need to start asking ourselves question is, to which extent do we want to have our day-to-day lives dictated by machines? In Sweden, we've been deploying the smart meter project, which is going to be very beneficial for the electricity industry. They can cut down on employees, certainly. They don't need anyone to go out and manually measure stuff in people's homes. But the interesting part about the smart meter project in Sweden isn't actually the benefits it's bringing to industries. It's the ideas that politicians appear to have, or decision makers appear to have, about the benefits that this brings to consumers. A healthcare robot, which takes care of somebody in need that may not be able to move efficiently on their own or be forgetful because they're old or they have some other problem, this is a clear benefit. I mean, this is kind of objectively beneficial to the person who has opted to have this service. A smart meter is not so obviously so. What it says in the government preparatory documents is that it will help consumers reduce the cost of electricity. And it will help you consume electricity in the most efficient way, like at the time of the day when you have wind energy, or at the time of the day when electricity is the cheapest. But think about it for a moment. Electricity companies need to make money. They don't want us to pay less for electricity because they still need to have the same revenues that they had in the past, or they would run at a loss, which would be bad for them. Similarly, the fact that we opened up the electricity market already allows us to choose actually wind power if we want that, or solar power, or nuclear power. We have in Sweden an abundance of different electricity operators that consumers can choose from. If it was about the choice of specific power source, the choice is already there. We don't need a smart meter in our house to tell us that we can make that choice. Now, what the smart meter actually does for most people is it reminds us when we are not able to make the choice. So, for instance, a lot of people cannot run their dishwasher in the middle of the night, even if electricity is cheaper in the middle of the night. The same thing with washing the clothes. You cannot do it in the middle of the day because you have to work. And you don't want the clothes to be lying around wet for the vast majority of the day. You effectively have to run your dishwasher and your clothes washer at about 1900 hours in the night, because that's when you're at home and it's before your kids go to bed. So what will your smart meter contribute to your life in this particular instance? Well, it will tell you that you're a bad citizen because you're not behaving in the way which is most loyal to the electricity system. You're not helping the even power balance in the grid, despite your best efforts. And then at the end of the month, you will have an electricity bill which is higher than you know that it could have been. So you're additionally getting penalized for having a job and ensuring that your kids get to sleep safely and soundly at night. And I think we have this kind of huge philosophical questions as a society to face with these technologies that we introduce through the Internet of Things and our vision of the smart city and the smart home, that to what extent are these technologies actually just going to be reminding us that we're less loyal to our societies than we could be? That the fact of human nature is we're a bit arbitrary. We sometimes forget things. We don't always behave optimally with respect to our peers. There's a difference between being a human and being a cogwheel. And that's for a good reason. And perhaps we need to start thinking of these technological solutions more as how do we make them fit with humanity rather than how can we make humanity into a clockwork. And that's a much more principled and overarching discussion, I think, than what we've been having so far. But I think it's the right, fundamentally, level at which we need to keep these discussions, at least for some time. Because if we don't know what we're trying to achieve with the overarching technological framework, I think also in the details, we will not reach anywhere useful. Thank you.
Beautiful, thank you. Very clear perspectives. And also recognizing that the world changes while we do it. Just underlining how important it is for us as consumers, as citizens, as people, to make our choices well informed, so understand what's going on.
But a lot of these choices aren't actually choices. In Sweden, there is a law which forces you to have a smart meter in your house, and then the government has post-fabricated supposed benefits. I had actually, like one guy in Brussels that I talked to said, you know what's the problem with the smart meters? It's that they don't have wireless connectivity. Imagine the kids nowadays, if they could have their smartphone and they go past the smart meter, they just do this, and they get the reading of all of the electricity consumption in the house. How happy they would be. Now, what kind of a teenager, like, if anyone knows any teenagers who would spontaneously perform this activity in their home and then studiously and happily scrutinize the results. You know, but decisions are being made on the premise that these teenagers exist.
Yes, very much there in the back, somebody.
Justin Queso from IEEE. I agree, humanity's at a big point. I could see a teenager doing it to check to see if their parents are up watching television before they're trying to sneak back in. But that might be the only situation where they might check the smart meter. I did have a question or a comment on the encryption and firewalls with the Internet of Things. As these devices become smaller and smaller, where do we put the firewalls and where do we put the encryption? When is the battery power going to catch up? Because the more we put that in there, the cost goes up and the power requirements go up. So I know, I forget what Greg said. We had a panel at WSIS and Greg Shannon, one of our experts, made a comment that they could probably make a phone perfectly safe, but do you want to pay $10,000, $100,000 for a phone? So I guess my question to everybody here is, where's the balance in this?
So, I mean, with all of these Internet of Things and automation and everything, can we just not kid ourselves and just say it? Like, we want to automate a lot of these processes so that we can kill jobs. That's what we're doing. We want not to do boring stuff. Most of these technologies are about reducing labor, right? The need for labor. And so, right. That wasn't any comment on you at all, sorry.
Valentina from Bosnia. I would like to go back to the awareness of municipality or local authorities in using or respecting their citizens' rights. And I will give an example. In Bosnia and Herzegovina last year had been a big floods. And of course, there was a need of doing a registry with the people that had been affected to try to help provide support from the different states. The best thing was that the municipalities uploaded the entire list of all these citizens, included not only telephone number, address, but also the identification number, which is a personal number, which it's against the law, because according to in Bosnia and Herzegovina, to the law on protection of personal data, this is not allowed to be done. But many of these municipal websites have this data. I find them by chance because I was working on this issue. And I don't know, I mean, they can be fine, but the point is just taking down this PDF now will resolve the issue. Those are there since June 2014. Many websites at the state level and also at all this track, I think that there is not a reflection around the issue of, it's not having a website accessible and, complying with the make it easy to have a sexy, e-commerce things, but there is also an attention of having, seems that the website, it's functional only if I have all these things, and there are no disclaimer about which kind of cookies, how, what, and when. Very few in my country, maybe commercial website has, but public authorities do not have. And I'm interested in how we can make capacity, because it's really important issue. Local municipality have access to all the data, but there is not an understanding of how important they are. Once they are online they are online forever. And I would like to have more input on how to really make local authorities doing their job.
I just wanted to add, in connection with what she already mentioned, we have already agreed that, that we ourselves are the most responsible for our data. But the second question is, those who collect our data, we have somehow to decide who of them will be responsible and to what extent they will be responsible for our data. And what they said about the companies, this is already a question, who is the big personal data big administrator, because the regulation goes to the big personal data administrators. So they are already unlimited because these are not only the telecommunications or the water or the municipalities. This happens that already private companies for those things. This is really a big question about the big data. The big providers of the personal data information regulation.
Just to answer your question, what we can do about it is enforcing the law, because that's the ridiculous thing. So we have the data protection regime in Europe from 1995 that has been implemented gradually across all European Union members, but you still see that basic infringements of the data protection law are escaping any kind of penalties, and you see that surprisingly with big companies like Google or Facebook that do that on a daily business. And when you see one person that is trying to get them to court, then they get into a lot of legal ramblings that no totally sane person would like to do. And to give you similar example from Romania, there's been a similar case when a city hall published online the list of the persons that were subsidized with a free metro ticket. And they were for people with disabilities. So they were smart enough not only to publish the name of that person, but also the disability that they had in order to get that information. So of course that person sued them in a civil court, and they won, and the city hall had to pay them something like, I think, 30,000 euros in moral damages, which is a all-time high for Romanian standards. So if you go and try to apply the law, you get some results, but it needs to be more on law enforcement. And I see actually that if the data protection law, as it is in the current format, with the data protection authorities that are mostly understaffed and do not have all the competencies, they are unable to do a proper implementation of the law, how are we going to deal with Internet of Things? I mean, it's very clear that the technology and the technologists and the companies that want to make money out of a personal data would win in the end.
I love it. Very good to hear. It's not only about who has access to our data, but also what data do they collect. In the previous session about Internet of Things, one person stood up and said, actually what we should have is transparency on which data are collected and in what way, etc. And that would help already. The second point, and the great thing in the example from the municipalities, municipalities are also, the government is also obliged to deal careful with our personal data. It's not exactly the same regulation as for businesses, but they are expected to do things, and they agree they are expected, and it's not happening because also they don't know how to do it. It's not highest priority, and most of all, many of those don't have it yet, so you're not in a hurry yet, because I'm still in the mainstream that hasn't done it well yet. Well, increasingly we become aware, also because of things that go wrong there, that we don't want that and that more attention should be given. Now, this whole history that we see developing there and the struggle to get out of it is something that we hopefully should prevent to happen with the Internet of Things. For multiple reasons. One of them is that you will not be able to deal with it within one jurisdiction, which is still an option in the municipalities. So let's make clear that we understand what we talk about and that the responsibility, the accountability for those who use those data, collect those data is also clear. And then last but not least also for the lady from Sweden, that there's choice for citizens. And make no mistake there either. The choices that you and I would make may not be the choices of another person. So it's also not like it's implementing one choice. It's creating choice, having the clear understanding of what's happening, so transparency and understanding, and accountability for those who deal with those data and they need to be aware of how to do that too. Yes.
I want to.
But go ahead. No, you were first.
Okay. Just very briefly, two things, because the gentleman in the front left asked where is the balance for a security of your phone, if you remember. I think in data protection, as soon as you're willing to make a consensus and find the balance, it won't be secure enough. So funny thing, there is no balance. Possibilities to go full protection, and that's expensive and it's slow and it's a big problem. And the second thing I want to mention about the electricity, the smart meters. In Austria, we have a university, and they told us a study that they've proven that it is possible to hack into the smart meters and make them count wrong. And as well, it is also possible with those smart meters, if you have the knowledge, that you are paying less, and the amount that you pay less pays your neighbor. So you transform the amount of your electricity to another smart meter. That's just what I wanted to mention.
If you could add the link on Twitter, it would be highly appreciated. Just to test it, of course, for testing purposes. Just to try to answer a bit to your question, from my perspective, if you talk about a provider of RFID chips, for example, they need to, they are a data controller. So if they are a data controller, they need to obey to the data protection rules in their country. So that could mean in the future, if the new data protection regulation gets in place, it could be privacy by default and privacy by design, which should be okay in practice. The problem is, if you don't have a functional regime all across the European Union, this doesn't work. Because then you go to Ireland, and you see that you will find the data protection authority, which is much willing to see data protection in a, let me try to find a euphemism on that, in a way that the companies would like and other citizens would like. So.
I was going to go back to the points that were made about municipalities keeping data. I've done quite a lot of work with our data commissioner on which of the principles are most abused. And probably the two most abused principles are people not doing data minimization in the first place. But the second one is people very seldom actually do data deletion. And it's a question of you may, for example, it's been agreed by a lot of people it's a very good idea to keep the GPS tracking information from mobile phones in disasters, in floods, in earthquakes, and so on, so you know where people are. I mean, Haiti was a case in point where that was used to bring aid to people. But you don't need to keep that data a year later, 2 years, and all the associated data with it. So it's right to use the data at the time to deal with a problem, but you shouldn't retain it and keep it on a database, let alone make that database public. And I think very few people, very few companies and data controllers actually look sensibly at how long do I need to keep this data. Some bank data you have to keep for 7 or 10 years, so they've got to keep it secure for that length of time. But a lot of other data, there is no need to keep it for any length of time, and there should be proper regimes to make sure people delete it. And the less data there is, the less personal data there is for people to hack into and do things with. Or anonymize it, yes. If you take out the metadata and you can anonymize it, because then you can do a study about how you can do things better later. But that is what tends not to happen. And I think that's an area where we could make enormous improvements if we all tried to make sure that that did happen in our own countries, in our own municipalities, and so on.
What I wanted to point out is, do we agree that the administration of personal data is at the same level of importance like, for example, accounting or legal service in the data providers? Well, it has already this importance. Then why then those people who deal with personal data are not having any education or not any certification? Because what has happened with this data is because probably they were not knowing that they have not to upload, or most of the data administration have no knowledge about the obligations or about the other things which they have to. And they still operate with this data. And they do this abuse of our personal data. I think it's a time when those people dealing with our data, because yes, we agree that we personally have to be careful with our data. But the second thing is those who deal with our data have to be at least educated, have some training and have some knowledge, and then to work with.
I just wanted to respond back to your question there, or statement, I should say. In a perfect world, I totally agree with you. However, there's cost to everything, and it's similar to automobiles. Automobiles could be built that are perfectly safe. You could walk away from just about anything, but then the cost becomes the cost of a home. And even air travel. Planes could be made even safer. But are people going to pay for a 2-hour flight what it costs to buy a car? No. And so, unfortunately, there has to be some kind of balance on the actual devices that we carry with us as far as cost and to add all of that stuff. And frankly, I don't get paid enough to spend the price of a car for a mobile phone. So I'm just saying that, unfortunately, I think in the world we live in, there's always, with everything, there's always going to be economic balances that have to factor into the production of this to make it available, because then if we don't, that could actually increase the digital divide, because then those who do not have enough money to do that, then all of a sudden they're stuck without a mobile phone, or especially in countries like Africa where that's becoming the means of communication to the internet, and then it becomes even more of a have and have not situation. So again, I agree with you in a perfect world, and if we could somehow find a way to make it possible, I would be totally on board with that.
I just wanted to respond to the lady who spoke before about training people properly about how to look after personal data. My own organization has produced a free document which you can find on our website, www.bcs.org, which is called the Personal Data Guardianship Code. Now, it relates to how the data protection directives are used in the UK, but it's not so different from how they're used in the rest of Europe. And there's a sheet for everyone involved in the collection, maintenance, and deletion of data about what their roles and responsibilities are. And we use it in the UK. We advise charities and so on to use it as a way to train their staff in how to deal with data protection. And so if you haven't got such a thing in your own country, please go free to the... All right, okay. Yeah, well, if you want it free, you can go to our website and just download it and print it out.
Yeah, I would like to add around impunity, because, for example, that's now my new passion is to write an email to my data protection agency. Banks have also these nice things on their website. If you want to have a secure online transaction, instead of your PIN or your CV, you put your personal number, civic number, and you have to agree. And this is displayed not the leaflet. They don't have the legal authority. Also, if you want to discuss with your bank, or if you want to pose a question to the bank, even if it's not your bank, maybe they just, you have to put your number, civic, unique citizen identification number. I think that I wrote this letter more than 1 month ago. So I've been acknowledged, but probably will nothing happen. Or I will get a nice paper that explains that all of them are breaching the law, but no one will go after them because they are the big banks, Sparkasse, Raiffeisen. We're not talking, it's not only banks insurance, telecoms, and air company, they are pretty heavy players. So there is an impunity system in place. And I would like also to understand if we cannot use our internal system. You know, I try with the data agency, I try with the court. When I finish my legislative or justice defense mechanism in Bosnia, where I go?
Okay, so I would like to go back to what Bogdan Manula from Romania already said, that of course this is ultimately a problem, and especially I guess in places like Bosnia and Eastern Europe, it would be a problem that there aren't that many legal recourses. What do you do when somebody does something wrong to you? You don't have that many choices, regardless of if it's privacy or somebody violated a contract or what happened. Now, when it comes to privacy, in Sweden, my experience has been that there's technical defeatism. We cannot possibly create these technologies in a way that protect privacy. We have to expect our privacy to be violated. There was a big state investigation in the Netherlands made in 2013 where they investigated government investigations in government investments and public procurement in IT systems, where they found out that not only is this defeatism propagated onto people involved in public procurement, but also technology companies use their superior knowledge of technology to trick legislators into investments that the legislators may not, or the public procurers may not objectively actually have otherwise chosen to do. And so here is a problem from the industry, that they are portraying things as having advantages that they do not have, and they're not being open about the facts, like the real reasons for why the investments are being made. It's like I say, you know, the smart meters have one clear advantage. It allows electricity companies to lay off people. But this is the only clear economic advantage, and it's a big one. They can save up to 600,000 euros per year in Sweden on laying off these people. And all of the other stuff that they're feeding into the political process is just made up. Well, apart from that one teenager that wants to find out when their parents are watching TV, but actually I think that teenager and the teenagers that I have spoken to about this problem, they are more concerned that their parents are monitoring them when they're watching TV. So they don't see really the benefit of the counter monitoring to that respect. But now the balance between security and privacy and consumer control, where I landed after spending some time in the parliament and also in general is more transparency towards consumers. We've had this big discussion about data breach notifications. Should we have them? Who should receive them? Why should they be received? I think it would be a very good idea to have both companies and the public sector continuously inform users, like private persons and consumers, about when problems arise in their IT systems. And if consumers were given the option to deal with breach notifications and then switch service provider when they found that their previous service provider isn't fixing problems quickly enough, or maybe they're not caring about problems at all, a lot of things would be solved, and you wouldn't have to make this one-off choice. Do I want to pay 100,000 for a mobile, or only 1,000, or 500 euros? It could be a gradual and incremental increase over time as more data breach notifications are sent, and you don't need to reach the 100% security bar overnight or through testing. You could gradually improve and at the same time cultivate a relationship of trust with the consumers you already have. And wouldn't it have been nice if the European legislator had considered that for the data protection regulation, which I think now they haven't, but wouldn't that have been finally a good procedure for reaching at least an acceptable level of security at the relatively low cost?
I could not agree with you more on that. And it's what you described to me reminds me similar to in the United States how safety features became more and more prevalent in automobiles. And the reason it happened was because the auto companies got sued. And they started making, because they realized from a cost-benefit aspect that it was cheaper to improve and add the safety to automobiles than pay lawsuits. So the thing about what's now with this massive change in humanity that we're facing with this technology is the way I see a potential benefit is that perhaps because this is so pervasive with the data and it's involved in every aspect of our lives, that this change, if it does happen, and along the lines of what you're saying, which I totally agree with, is that maybe this can then spill into all other industries. Because once people begin to expect that type of transparency and that type of, I'll say, corporate responsibility, for a lack of a better term, in this field, they're going to expect it everywhere else then, and also perhaps even in governments more and throughout. So I think that's why events like this are so very important, because this group here is at the beginning of this sea change, I guess, in humanity. And I guess it's up to the people in this room and all the other IGFs and everything like that to take this and apply it to all aspects of your lives, not just this ICT area. And I think it's a huge opportunity for just humanity moving forward.
Yeah, very much so. This is what's happening. Progress is happening, technology progress is happening, and that's not always equal to social progress in the moment. But the most powerful thing is conscious citizens who take choices and who have choice. So in that way, I couldn't agree more than what you just said. Let's not expect that we can stop anything to happen in the moment, or we don't even need to. But we need to be aware and vigilant, and where there's clear cases where it doesn't work, and the smart meters was one of those, then let's take action and let's use those opportunities to get citizens to be better informed. Better informed citizens will require from their communities, like, hey, what you do with my data? Hey, how long are you going to keep those data, maybe, ultimately? Who's asking it now? I don't know. But it may become a habit. We see those things happening. We see that awareness goes up. We've seen it in environmental care, and maybe it can still be better, but you see movement there. We've seen it also in other matters, and I'm sure we're going to see it here too. But then we need these debates. A good example of those smart meters is actually, you have them in Sweden because European Parliament in 2006 said you should have them for a citizen to be in control, the two arguments that you say, in control of their bills, and to be more conscious about the electricity use. And in the Netherlands, one wanted to make it obligatory too. Then when research showed that this would mean that electricity companies, in the way it was proposed, would be able to even see what movie you're seeing at what time, because of the digital footprint of that movie, it became optional. And I think if the makers of smart meters would have fought back and would have assumed that society wouldn't accept this granularity of data, that they may have chosen for every hour we meet, we meet or we meter or something like that, in a way where objectives are still met and intrusions are much less. So that thinking has never been at the ground. I think for future legislation and for future developments, this thinking will be taken into account from the beginning.
And I mean, I think my problem with the smart meters is really much more existential than, do we measure every hour? Do we measure every 2 minutes? Can you see what movie you're seeing? Like, the basic problem of this is most private persons in their daily lives cannot choose when they consume electricity. Like, for instance, if I want coffee in the morning, I need to run my coffee machine in the morning. If I make my coffee at 2 a.m. and I wake up at 6, my coffee will be cold. It's not good for me, it's not good for anyone, I get in a bad mood. The same thing, if my children come home from school at 4, they want to run the microwave for whatever afternoon snack they're having at 4. They don't need an afternoon snack at 21 in the evening, even if the electricity is cheaper at that time. If I have eaten, I need to do the dishes immediately. I don't have need for hot water at 5 a.m. in the morning Because I'm not going to go up at 5 a.m. in the morning to do my dishes only because the electricity happened to be cheaper at that time. And I
nobody
think there's a
says you have to.
fundamental ideological problem expressed in the Brussels impetus of 2006 when they're expecting people to make these meticulous adjustments to their daily routines in order to serve the greater interest of marginally reducing electricity consumption over 24 hours in a day. If we actually wanted to do something about electricity consumption, we'd go for the industries. That's where we actually consume electricity in Sweden and in many other countries. Paper mass industry, the chemicals industry, pharmaceutical, wherever you have electricity consumption. But we're not. Instead, we're telling people, you're the bad cog. We will charge you extra money for it. And then we will additionally put a small blinking apparatus in your home that can continuously remind you by blinking and giving you audiovisual signals that you're a bad person who's not serving your society and you should do something else with your time. Which I think this is not a nice way to treat people. We should not accept our governments treating us that way.
I never saw my smart meter in this way, so thank you for sharing your view on that.
Hello, Mirana Taskova, data protection lawyer. Actually, I'm sorry, I would just change the topic just for a minute. I'm very much interested about the new data protection regulation that is coming, and specifically the one-stop shop. For me, I'm coming from Bulgaria. This is not, this is not country like the UK or Germany. The data controllers are not maybe so numerous, but I just wanted to hear if someone can tell me how do you think that this one-stop shop would affect the countries which are different from the UK and Germany? If someone has any comment about that. Do you think that the Data Protection Authority would be able to handle that request from Bulgaria to the UK, for example? No? Okay, sorry.
I see a lot of people, like, we can philosophize about it, but I see no faces like, I know the answer. So.
I promise to keep that short. I think it's just about the right time to close the follow-up and to thank you all for contributing instead of our panelists, which, in my opinion, was not a bad thing. Actually, we had a great discussion. We've said some very important topics, and then the message was clear. If you would like to add something, or maybe just as a closing remark, feel free.
Yep. In software development, there's a really cool way of developing software. It's called Keep It Simple, Stupid, and it works great.
Yeah, for me, the points that continue to come back is transparency, so that we can understand what's happening there. And that's not just what we tell about what we do, but also awareness that people are aware, taking the accountability. So who is responsible for what? Municipality, electricity company, whoever. And the third thing, I think choice is crucial. And some people have a very strong preferences for one thing, and other for the other. As you were explaining, it's also a trade-off, and the trade-off is not the same for the same people, and it may not even be the same for a person over time, because you may be willing to give up something more to get something else back if that's what you need in a moment. So I really appreciate the discussion, and it adds to the understanding of diversity and really the background where you come from as well.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.